you don't try sales like it's a pair of shoes at the store, right? If you're going to go into sales, you've got to be ready to make the sacrifices and the commitments, the early mornings, the late nights, the weekends as necessary. There is no 9 to 5 sales job in my book. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for a while. My dad was doing odd jobs. Long story short, anything that I really wanted, I had to go earn. I had my first paper route when I was 12, right? I always loved fishing. At one point in my early teenage years, I would have my mom or dad drive me to the salvage yard and I would buy old lead from the scrapyard at 25 cents a pound. And I'd go into my parents' garage and I would melt it down to make fishing sinkers and sell them for 10 cents an ounce or barter them to get on fishing boats for free.
Hi, Matt. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Super excited to be here.
Super excited to have you here. Welcome to Peak Performance Perspectives, where we help entrepreneurs master health, wealth, and relationships. I have to ask you first, what does peak performance mean to you?
It's a good way to break the ice. Peak performance to me is when you're taking care of yourself in a way that allows you to achieve what you want to in business, family life, social life, and financially. That comes through things like diet, exercise, habits, routines. I've seen a lot of people out there that call themselves successful in business, but their family life and financial life and social life are really not doing well. And I can't really consider those folks peak performers. So to me, it's the equilibrium between taking care of yourself in a way that you can achieve the other things that you want to in your life.
How do you maintain an equilibrium over so many things, but also excel at them? Because sometimes balancing means being average at almost everything.
Yeah, I don't actually see it that way. I think there's different cycles of your life. And in any business, I've been in sales and sales leadership now for a very long time, almost 2 decades now. And there's definitely certain parts of the year that are busier than others, end of month, end of quarter, end of year, right? And that's when you really need to put your head down and make sure that you're taking care of your business. Now, your business doesn't go away outside of the peak times of the year, but maybe you have a little bit more bandwidth to spend time with your family, go on vacation, right? Really take care of those other parts of your life so that when you need to bury your head into your business and with your customers, you don't have a bunch of folks that surround you and feel isolated and feel desolate, right? So I think it's a matter of identifying your priorities, making sure that you're very clear on your priorities, and managing your time in such a way that you're taking care of each of those priorities in your life. And I also think, Mark, that the old adage, right, how you do anything is how you do everything. And if you're really good at business and you're really good at taking care of your family and you're really good at being present in your relationships and spending time with friends and making money, those habits and behaviors tend to replicate themselves in one way or the other in all the various aspects of one's life. I've seen very few people that are really good at one thing and terrible at the others. So I don't necessarily think that managing your priorities and managing the balance makes you average at anything. I think it's the mindset that could make you average at everything because you're not determined to be great at any one thing.
So what you're saying is instead of trying to balance all things on your plate all the time, you map out your priorities and then you hyper focus on business when it's the crucial times of the years. And when it's not, when things are cruise control, you hyper focus on other priorities, family it be, health it be. So basically there's a constant amount of work being done in all the things at the same time, but depending on the time of the year and how the priorities lay out, you're hyper focused on those things to excel at them.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Love it.
Yeah.
Now you said it, and that was going to be my second question, which is that you have been a sales leader, a nationally recognized sales leader for over 2 decades. Let's start from the beginning. What drew you into the career of sales, and what has kept you passionate towards it after 2 whole decades?
Yeah, great question. A little bit of a short story. So I'm in economics class in high school. This is 1990, right? And I go to economics class and my teacher says, we have a guest speaker today. This guy is standing at the front of the class. He's 6'5", 6'6". I remember his name, but I won't say it on the show. And he's got diamond cufflinks and the custom monogram button-down shirt, super fancy suit, Italian shoes. And he says he owns a stock brokerage firm on Long Island and he makes $5,000 a day, whatever it was at that time. And I was just like, I need to talk to this guy. And And I had aspirations at that time. I knew I was going to NYU. I thought I was going to be like an analyst or something like that. But there was something about how this guy presented himself that made me very excited. And as he left in his white Lamborghini, right? So now I'm like, oh my God, I gotta go meet this guy. So I wait outside class, I get the guy's card, and I was working at a bakery down the block from my mom's house at the time, and wasn't allowed to use the phone. But the nice lady who worked the afternoon shift with me, she didn't really give me a hard time about it. I called this guy every day for a month, and his secretary wouldn't put me through. Finally, I get through, and he answers the phone. What do you want? And I said, dude, you talked to my class at high school a couple of weeks ago, and I want to interview for a job. He says, oh, that's it? I said, yeah. He says, okay, come in next Thursday, whatever day it was. I go in there, I open the door, and it's 150 or 200 guys standing up, pitching. They got phones in their hand. The place is loud. It stunk like cigarettes, but there was like just energy that was like, whoa, this is awesome. Long story short, I got the job. And a week after high school, I started off as a cold caller at one of the Long Island brokerage firms that they ended up making a bunch of movies at. So I literally thrust myself in it. But from day one, Mark, there was something about the energy. Guys were giving each other high fives. They were ridiculing each other when they screwed up a pitch or when a prospect hung up on them. And I was just enamored with the fact that these guys were making so much money. And I just saw myself as being part of it. And that's how I got started.
I know this is your origin story, but I have a question about the origin story. You were in high school, so what, you're 17, 18 years old.
17, yeah.
And you see somebody, you like that person, you want to find out more about what they do. And you call this person 30, 31 days in a row, the entire month. You're hungry like a wolf. Where did you find the resilience, the tenacity to do that? Because there had to be those elements before you, before that event, right? Growing up, when was the first time you felt that tenacious, that I'm not going to give up until something happens?
Yeah, so introspection time. I grew up in Queens, in New York City, and my parents, as hard as they tried, they gave us a great life, but we were frugal and very much lower middle class. I love my mom and I love my dad, but they were blue collar workers. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for a while. She worked at a diner part-time, and then she started for the New York City school system as an assistant health aide just to get a job with benefits. My dad was doing odd jobs. Long story short, anything that I really wanted, I had to go earn. I had my first paper out when I was 12, right? I always loved fishing. At one point in my early teenage years, I would have my mom or dad drive me to the salvage yard and I would buy old lead from the scrapyard at 25 cents a pound. And I'd go into my parents' garage and I would melt it down to make fishing sinkers and sell them for 10 cents an ounce or barter them to get on fishing boats for free. So I always had this really gritty, very unentitled way about myself. And I think what I saw in the brokerage firm, or when I saw, to answer your question, right? I saw something I really wanted and I knew it was just up to me to go get it. Right? Getting up for a paper out in the morning at 5:30, 6 o'clock in New York in December isn't easy, but I did it, right? Having odd jobs through high school. I worked at a butcher shop for a number of years where the shift was like 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. I was 15, 16 years old, right? Probably shouldn't have even been working there. But it was all about doing the work that got me the result. And so when I was at that particular point in my life, the only work I had to do was to dial a 10-digit phone number and do it every day until they either told me yes or no. That seemed pretty damn easy compared to everything I had done up until that point. And if he had said no, then we might not be sitting here. But he said yes, and that was the launch of an amazing run in sales and ultimately sales leadership.
Almost all people who are trying to learn sales, question they're asking is, what do I need to do to become a great salesperson? And for me, when they ask it, different people answer differently. For me, I always answer, it's not necessarily what you need to do, it's more about who you need to become. Because there's a certain personality type that is good at sales. Some of those elements that you mentioned, tenacity, understanding the big picture. Either you said no, say or no, yes or no, the persistence, the consistency, the discipline of doing X number of dials a day. What do you think makes a great salesperson? So, for example, in your story, there were obviously needs that you had growing up, forced you to act in certain way, melting things, selling things, doing all those things. But do you think the greatest salespeople are also wired differently? Is that what makes it them? Is it nature or is it nurture? Is it the training and the practice and the circumstances of life? Or are the greatest people, salespeople just wired differently?
I think it's a combination of the two, right? And it's something you said as you opened up that question, Mark, is very interesting because it's something I've been thinking a lot about. I've had the benefit of working with, hiring, and training hundreds of salespeople in my career. Every single one that interviewed with me and says, I want to try sales has not been successful, right? You don't try sales like it's a pair of shoes at the store, right? If you're going to go into sales, you've got to be ready to make the sacrifices and the commitments, the early mornings, the late nights, the weekends as necessary. There is no 9 to 5 sales job in my book. And whether you don't necessarily have work to do, but you're working on yourself, I think those are all very important boundaries to, or lack thereof, to really embrace. And very few people in my experience who have tried sales has ultimately been successful, especially at a top 3 or top 1 percentile. So I do think that there are certain aspects of people who have been successful in sales around grittiness, around a no holds barred approach, nothing to lose, and just this overall mindset that they're gonna do it. That said, I don't think any of that can't be trained. It's about the commitment and it's about how far are you willing to go to train yourself? How far are you going to go to invest in yourself? To prioritize, especially early in your sales career, prioritize your job over potentially other things so you get a running start. And so I think that maybe there is a little bit of wiring in it, but I don't think any of it can't be learned or trained as long as it's the right person doing it.
You have scaled 4 different organizations, hired, trained hundreds of reps. When you're interviewing somebody, I know there is a resume, there are questions about their previous experiences, their role plays that you're doing. How do you recognize talent? Because sometimes the greatest talent isn't obvious on a piece of paper. Have you ever come across somebody or situations where you're like, this guy or girl has something and they don't realize it? How do you go about recognizing that as somebody who hires and trains salespeople?
Yeah. So I think the resume is important. And honestly, the resume helps me qualify out more than qualify in. So I look at the resume, I look at how many jobs have they had? How long have they been at each position? Are there metrics on the resume? What do the metrics tell me about the productivity of this person? And in the absence of any of those things, I tend to qualify out more than qualify in. I'm very difficult when it comes to screening resumes and potential candidates. But once you're sitting with me, I have a lot of open-ended questions. I run every single first interview the exact same way because I have a pattern of questions that I ask, when I ask them, why I ask them, and I listen for different responses. But I like to ask 2 particular series of questions, right? Tell me about the most difficult thing you've ever done, personally or professionally. And then I follow it up with what you learned, what would you differently, right? How has this impacted you in your career, your home life, etc. And then if you Google Dean Graziosi, 7 Levels of Why, you'll come up with a podcast appearance that Dean did on the Lewis Howes School of Greatness show probably 7 or 8 years ago. And in that episode, Dean walks through a seminar that he was doing and about the 7 levels of why. And it starts out with asking a question. Why do you want this job? I want to make a lot of money. And then you ask why in response to that question as many as 7 times. And typically around question 4 or question 5, you start to notice something about the candidate. Either they start to get very defensive, they run out of really good reasons, and the conversation just goes stale, or they start to get very emotional. And you notice the lip quiver a little bit. I've even had some folks like shed a tear. And that's when you know that they have emotional reasons to be successful. And the candidates that I get to that point and they have something that they're carrying, a point to prove, a chip on the shoulder, a parent who passed away that they really like and they want to make proud, someone who doesn't want to follow in their parents' footsteps and wants to start their own journey and build their own legacy. When I unearth that from a candidate, I'm like, that's going to be my next top producer. That's not to say that the other candidates that maybe don't get that far aren't the best. But when I can touch that nerve and get the candidate to open up to me, A, it's foundational trust, right? but it's also like you're unearthing the real emotional reasons why they need to be successful at the job, not why they want to be successful at the job. And there's a major difference there.
When you're working with groups of people, what are some of the biggest challenges you face when you are building these teams up from ground up? Because you have done it more than one time and you have done it excellently every single time. So how do you deal with these challenges?
The best way to deal with challenges is know that there's going to be a lot of them and they're going to come very often, right? And they're probably going to be big, hairy, audacious challenges. So every time I go into a build, right, I try to think about what are the potential blind spots? What do I not know? And honestly, I try and knock as many of those questions out as I can through my interview process, right? And start to really get an idea of what I'm stepping into. But I'm just wired to deal with problems. I'm wired to deal with the nuances and intricacies of building a team. And by the way, building a team sounds easy, right? You post a job ad, you hire a bunch of people, and you get them and you make them productive. If it were only that easy. You have to know the vision of what you're building before you can identify who we need to hire. What are the systems and processes that we need to build in order to make the sales team productive? What's the culture that we want to build as a sales organization? I think honestly, like companies have cultures. I also tend to think that there's this kind of a subculture within the sales team and, driven by the caliber of the people that you're going to hire and invest in, right? And so it's not as easy as it thinks, and as a lot of people think, and it's very nuanced. And you've got to know that those nuances are going to come up and have the space and the self-awareness to know that you're going to have some of the answers. You're going to need to look to others in the organization to help you figure out the answers. And that's a great way to be collaborative at the executive level. But anybody who thinks this is easy, it's not true. And it's not for everyone, right? You can take an executive from a big company that's been there 10, 15, 20 years and has had a very successful career and drop him or her into an early stage startup. And they're like a fish out of water, right? Because there is no handbook. There is no standard operating procedures. There is no help desk where you can find out how to download Microsoft Office 365, right? There is none of that. And it's your job as a leader to go build it. And that's when you need to take a very programmatic and very prescriptive approach into prioritization and figuring out what's best for the team.
You mentioned how the sales floor and the sales team is like a subculture of the company's culture, because it's 100% true. People who are not in sales, they don't understand how things work in sales, because it's the hardest job you can ever have. It can be the most rewarding job you can ever have, but it's also the hardest job you can ever have. And the problems you face on the sales floor are beyond, because it has to do directly with dollars. There's a lot of emotions on an individual level if you make a sale or not. There are a lot of emotions and stress on a team level on how a team is performing, because there are multiple teams on the floor. What are some strategies that you use to maintain high energy and motivation within your teams? Because unfortunately, sometimes some organizations have a revolving door and it's just leading by fear that you don't hit numbers, you're out. People are just working to survive. How do you do it differently?
Yeah, so I think it's the leader that is responsible for setting the tone for the business. Okay. And I'll give you some very practical examples of this. I have the biggest resting bitch face that I think has ever been created. My kids tell me all the time. My son asked me just yesterday, Daddy, are you upset about something? I just have one of those faces that when I'm sitting and I'm relaxing, it looks like I'm frowning and then I'm upset. I can't do anything about it. I can't change my face, but I have to make I have to take very intentional effort that when I walk into that sales floor and people see me as the leader of the team, that I am upbeat, I have a smile on, I don't look like I'm pissed off, because I can't tell you how many times I've walked in the office on the phone and everybody who comes into my office that same day says, you look really busy this morning, right? So it's like, how am I showing up for the team and how is the team interpreting, right, what I'm going through and how that energy impacts them? So I think it's up to the leader to set the energy tone, right? Get up, be present on the floor. Don't sit in your office with the door closed all day. It just cuts you off from the world, and your team needs you there. Right? Your team needs to access you. They have questions, they have needs, and they need you there. But I think it's also about how you communicate with your team. Every Monday morning, I just wrapped up a 4-year run at RealPage, had a great time. But every Monday morning, we had a jumpstart meeting that started off with, some sort of music on a speaker, and the team broke my chops all the time, that I only listen to old school hip hop and techno. That's true. What's your next point, right? But we got the team going every Monday, and I think that was really important. We did everything from a wind strand to a gong when deals closed. We celebrated people all the time. I would, make sure we got the team out of the office, so let them know that I care about them, just not in the office, but outside the office too. So it's a lot of things, but it takes intentional effort. And I'll tell you, some of my first and second line leadership team at RealPage, they were better at it than me. And you know what? That's okay, because part of my job is to hire people smarter than me that can do things better than me anyway. So I think it takes the awareness about how you're showing up for your team and being intentional about being there for them, being intentionally high energy and showing them that you care. And that's how you really build a high energy and motivate team. Is also, you mentioned motivate, right? I'm also a big believer that we hire, as sales leaders, we need to hire intrinsically motivated people. But I think the bigger question, according to W. Edward Deming, and I'm doing a whole kind of video series on this, is how do you create the conditions as a leader and where you can make other people successful, right? And for me, it's about my relationship with marketing, my operational cadence, how we're training and coaching the team, how we're creating the right incentive plan, the vision and velocity, the analytics we're looking for, how we're communicating with peers, and ultimately, to your point, the energy that we're bringing to the teams. We can go through that some other time, but I think motivating the team, it's not just all about putting a bunch of motivational gifs and motivational videos in the chat. That's going to work some days and it'll be very kind of case sensitive. But what are you doing as the leader to show that you're working for your team, removing roadblocks, creating opportunities for them, and really giving them the infrastructure to not just be good at their job today, but preparing them for their job tomorrow?
All these things you're doing for the team, for them to be a peak performance sales team. You have received numerous President Club awards, both individually and as a leader. So if you had to name just one thing, what is it that you think sets your team apart from other teams on performance?
I think it's two things. I think it's the caliber of the people that I've had the benefit of hiring and the vision and the mission that I hire for, right? I had an interview probably 10 years ago with a CEO, and he asked me a very important question. He says, "What's your number one job as a leader?" And I said, "To set the vision." And he told me I was wrong. And he told me my number one job was to hire. And I told him I disagreed with him. I ended up not getting the job, obviously. But I don't think you can be very clear on who you need to hire until you have the vision of what you want to build. And then once you have the vision of what you want to build, you have to tell every person that you're hiring in the course of their interview process what you're trying to build. So that they can't turn around after the offer and say, "This isn't what we talked about. This isn't the current conditions and where we're going." But also, there are certain people that are going to say, "Listen, your vision sounds great. It's just not for me." And that's great. Okay. So I think you've got to have the right vision and hire the right people. And if I can nail two things that have helped me in my entire career, it's
on the sales floor. If we divided the people on three groups, there are people, and I'm just being 100% honest based on my observation. There are people who are just not going to cut it. Everything, they're complaining about it. They have a bad attitude. They don't know how to reframe. They're constantly focused on what is not working. They're unable to control their emotions and move on. There's a second group, which is the middle group. These are average to good salespeople. They show up. They are slightly creative. They listen to what they're told. They do the job. And they bring in consistent, semi-consistent results. There's a small group of people which are your true performers. And while they are making the most amazing amount of sales ever, they come with a unique set of problems. Some of the best salespeople I ever worked with are people who do not have a long attention span. It allows them to move on from a rejection, right? Motivation for them sometimes is the sales that they're making, but they also didn't become number one salespeople in the world or in the country or in the organization as setting average goals for themselves. Today, this month, they made 20 sales and they were number one. Next month, they want to make 25 sales. Next month, they want to make 30 sales. And they're putting themselves in a position now where they're not hitting this ridiculous goal, even though they're 300% over goal. They are driving themselves insane. I'm not good enough. I'm not this. I'm not that. That's a
Mhm.
whole different type of person to manage than a person who you're trying to, like a dead body dragging to the floor. Let's go. How do you help that person who's just that driven and going crazy because they have set goals for themselves that are amazing? They're better than good enough. They're just going too hard at it. How do
Yeah.
you help them control their emotions?
It's funny because I think I definitely put myself in the latter group that you described, right? And my fiance has to talk me off the ledge about this a lot when I get down on myself. You can't manage everybody differently, first and foremost, right? Number one, when you have the kind of the folks that are negative and they're just being cancerous, you have to help them figure out that the job's not for them as quickly as possible. We try not to make bad hires. Some of them slip through, and it's better that you part ways quick rather than deal with a long headache. But for the top performers that are constantly questioning themselves, you've got to create an environment with them so they know it's okay to tell you about those kind of self conversations or conversations with themselves and the pressure that they're putting themselves under because it's your job as their leader to manage it and coach them through it. And that's something that I did not understand early in my leadership career. I just was like, here's your number, go get it. And I'm going to manage everybody with the same vanilla paintbrush. And it was a disaster. But now I'm thinking of several folks that worked in my organization at RealPage that were constantly questioning themselves, constantly down on themselves, constantly trying to raise the bar on themselves. And while I appreciate that, it's my job to know the data and pick up on what they're actually doing. They're stuck in their head about it. And sometimes you need to diffuse that conversation with data. Like, hey, Mark, you did 20 sales last month. You have a target of 25 this month. I know you as a person. You're going to put a lot of pressure on yourself to get there. How are you building pipe to get there right now? Now I have changed the conversation away from getting to the 25 sales. And you're like, that's a great idea. Now I got to go build the pipe. I got to go. So get in my office and go build the pipe. Or what's the best way, Mark, for you to get from 20 to 25 to 30 without driving yourself crazy and working 80 hours a week? Those same people, when you ask a coaching question like that, they're going to figure out how to shorten their sales cycle, how to circumvent some part of the sales process, something along those lines, so that they're working smarter, not necessarily harder. Some of them are just going to work hard until they figure out, and then you're going to have a burnout conversation with them. But I think it's the job as the leader to create that environment where they feel comfortable telling you about their own internal conversations and then asking questions that kind of change up the narrative. We're never, I don't want to say never. It's very difficult to help someone change how they feel. Emotions are very closely held. It's one thing to tell them, and it's one thing to hear them. It's a whole nother thing to change. That's a whole nother Tony Robbins type episode. But what's our job to do is empathetically listen and then change the conversation. When you can change the paradigm away from, I'm so overwhelmed, I have to hit 25 sales next month. What am I going to do if I don't get it? Hey, what are the things we can do now to make sure to increase your chances of hitting it so that you're not just working 80-hour weeks? And when you help people through those kind of breakthrough moments, that's when I think you're really getting through to your team. And as you build the muscle memory that they start to continue to hit their own imposed goals month over month, you tend to have those conversations less frequently because they start to believe in themselves. Sometimes people just need to know that someone believes in them. Not everybody came from homes as a kid or a teenager or students in college and stuff where the parents were super supportive and they listened. Some of them were just like, do your homework, or they weren't home or whatever. And sometimes we need to play that role and be that person to our team in order for them to feel heard, felt, and embraced.
Two quick points to that. You talked about sometimes this is something you struggle with too. I think it's impossible to be a true peak performer and not struggle with this. I think questioning yourself is what drives us
Mhm.
because step one is we imagine, can I just? Step two, we say, why can't I do this? Step three, we start trying at it, right? And then the demons start talking in our head. But it's the two sides to the same coin. I say that the fire that gives us warmth also burns down villages, right? It's this drive that causes us to move forward, but it's always questioning. I have done that. I do that on a daily basis. So I really have a lot of connection to what you just said. And the second point, this also is a great reason why leaders and coaches are needed. Everybody needs a coach. Everybody needs a leader if you are a peak performer, because at the end of the day, they are not helping you learn tactics because you're already at the top. They are helping you with everything else for you to continue performing. Serena Williams, Roger Federer's coach, is not showing them a new way to do a backhand. It's just getting their mind right when they're at the Wimbledon, right? So I love it. You have an incredible personal change story that is tied to moving to Texas. Tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about that.
Thank you. Yeah, so I moved to Texas a little over 10 years ago. Technology company I was working for at the time gave me an amazing relocation offer, and I came down here. When I started at that particular technology company, I had no idea what enterprise software was. So I stepped in, took over a team in its nascent stages, knew nothing about the technology they were selling, and it was literally my way of overcoming all of that, scaling the team, dealing with a failed product 6 months into my tenure, having to rebuild the whole thing was and just work, just work. I didn't have kids at the time. I think my ex-wife was pregnant maybe a year or so later, but I turned around and all of a sudden I was 300 plus pounds. And we moved to Texas, and everything's bigger in Texas. I got 3 flights of stairs to put the kids to sleep, and I was getting winded going up the stairs. I'd tie my shoes in the morning and I'd feel like a bowling ball was in my lap. And I started to have these terrible dreams about going to the doctor and the doctor looking me in the eye and said, "We have to have a tough conversation. You have diabetes too," or whatever. And that's how I knew it was really time when it invaded my psyche. I was unhappy with how I looked, and that's a whole nother self-critique thing. But I got down here and was within 2 months, I decided that I needed to change. So I went down the block to the gym. I picked the one that was closest to the house, eliminated objections. I went in and I bought a bunch of gym clothes, and I was big on listening to, actually, I hadn't started to listen to podcasts yet, but I bought myself some gym clothes. I joined MyFitness and I started to log everything that I ate. And I was blown away. I was consuming 3,500, 4,000 calories a day, easy, easy when I first started. And I was drinking a lot. I remember before I moved to Texas, I had a habit of sitting in front of the computer on Sunday afternoons from 11 or 12 o'clock in the morning or noon till 7, 8, 9 o'clock Sunday night. And my ex-wife would bring me lunch or bring me dinner. I'd have a couple of cocktails. I'd sit there and eat ice cream, putting reports together. And I was just like, this has got to stop. Yeah, I cleaned myself up. I stopped drinking on weekdays. I logged what I ate. I went to the gym 3 or 4 days a week back then, and I lost 100 pounds in a year. And happy to say that I've kept 90 of it off. That last 10 has gone up and down a few times, but it was very easy for me to see then and now that it's the little choices and the little decisions that we make that really lead up to big impacts in our life. And man, I look at that day I made that decision, and one of the days where I'm most proud of myself for launching on a journey to do something difficult.
Sales is such a stressful job, especially for peak performers who are constantly pushing themselves. My story was I started getting obese when I was in sales because I would self medicate with food and alcohol. It
Mhm.
made me feel good, especially if you're on the phone all day long for 12 hours, 13-hour days. You need something to do because a lot of that is just going to the dialer and it's just moving to the next one and moving to the next one. If I am listening to this podcast, right, and I am thinking that's exactly the problem I have a desk job, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm working 12, 13 hours, I'm putting weight on. What would Matt say are some quick things, like you talked about simple things that you can start implementing to start making the change? What are some of those things you would say they can do today?
Yeah. I think it starts with examination. What are you doing now? And when you have an open and honest conversation with a friend, a doctor, yourself, and you're like, I have 3 cocktails a night or 2 beers a night, and I go to McDonald's or Chick-fil-A 3 times a week, like those are the easiest things to change. You know you do those things. So you need to make the tough decision to eliminate those from your routine. Next, big objection. I don't have time to go to the gym. Really? You realize there's some of them that are open 24 hours a day. Most of them are open very early in the morning. I'm not a morning person. Okay. Are you committed to losing the weight, or are you more concerned with identifying yourself as a non-morning person? So you got to listen to the objections and peel them back and help them see that there is a way to do it. And you're just what they're doing is lacking commitment, right? And so I would say figure out what you're eating, start going to the gym and hold yourself accountable 3 or 4 days a week, right? To begin with. Something I learned in listening to the Tim Ferriss show. I think several folks on the Tim Ferriss show wear the same thing every day. I don't wear the same thing every day. But what I did do is I went out and bought a bunch of gym clothes that all match, right? Neutral colors, top and bottom, so that when I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm not figuring out what I need to wear because it all matches, right? And just those little things that add up to big success. So how do you take that in context of your life between what you're eating, what time you're doing it, being disciplined about sleep? That's something that I've gotten much, much better at for the most part. And sleeping is healing, and you've got to give your body and your mind time to heal. So I think those 3 or 4 things are the best way to get started.
You talked about the objection of being too busy to go to the gym. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate if this podcast releases and people listen to it and they say you had one of the country's greatest sales leaders and you didn't talk anything about how to overcome sales objections. One of the most common objections an entrepreneur is facing when they're trying to sell a product to a client is that client is saying, this is just not the right time. I'm so busy. The minutia of life is getting into the way. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I think come February of 2025, things will ease up a bit. And I think that's when I'll reach out to you. How would sales master go about overcoming this objection?
I think a true sales master would understand that if you're getting that objection, you didn't ask the right questions up front, right? There's like solution selling as an art and discipline is something I'm super passionate about. And I worked for a great CRO, Brian McCarthy and JP Bolin. They're both over at Rubrik now. And they were just absolutely disciplinarians around solution selling methodologies. So while we talk about the profession of being in sales, I think sales is disguised as curiosity with a big commission check. Okay. We don't sell anything. What we do is provide solutions to problems. So if you're getting into a sales cycle, you've got to understand the problem that you're solving. How urgent is it for them to fix? What are the consequences of not fixing it now? Do they have the means to fix it now? Or how do we make this a priority project that takes budget from other things that were earmarked for this year, right? And ultimately create a business plan to solve their problem. There were very few entrepreneurs, business leaders, C-level executives that got out of bed today and said, you know what? This sounds like a great day to buy some software, right? I have nothing to do. Let's go call up these software companies. We'll look at a bunch of demos and maybe we'll buy something today. It's Wednesday. Like, why not? That's what we do on Wednesdays. None of them, right? But they all got out of bed today and most of the good ones anyway, looking to fix a problem, achieve a business goal, improve something happening in their business. And I believe that the more we know about the domain in which we sell into and the questions to ask and the way to navigate that conversation outside of talking product, the higher the close ratio is going to be. If you're a salesperson and you find yourself repeatedly getting the feedback, now is not the right time. Your listeners may not like this, but it's your job to ask that question way sooner in your sales process so that you're not getting blindsided when you're thinking you're getting the ink on a contract.
Matt, there are so many people that I've encountered in the world of sales, and the greatest leaders that I've ever met are people who are open, honest, straightforward, know their stuff, and caring. And I could count them on one hand. Until today, there were only 4 fingers raised, and you filled up the 5th one. The personality that you carry with yourself, the energy that you bring, there is a sense of calmness about you that gives assurance I can assume, gives assurance to a salesperson on the floor because they know they have somebody who's looking after them, who know their stuff, and they're safe with. These things, I believe, cannot be taught. I think these things grow in a person like a small seed into a plant through their life experiences, through the things they have done. So thank you for being out there and providing a right and good example of what a true sales leader should look like. Thank you for being on the show. Any last words for our audience members?
Well, thanks for the kind words, Mark. I really appreciate it. Given your audience, my closing remark would be peak performance is a constant concept. It's not a constant achievement, right? And if you think you're at your peak now, my challenge to each and every one of you is what's your peak in 6 months, right? I don't think there is ever really a peak. It's like a false peak where you get to the next level and then you realize there are things about yourself that you can be doing differently or doing better. So constantly look around and figure out, am I achieving my best? Am I operating at my peak performance? And if you even have so much as a hunch that you have additional opportunity, go investigate that. Go dig. spend an hour on the internet and just go into a black hole about that specific subject. Go talk to someone. There's so many resources out there free. And don't be afraid to invest actual money into yourself. I'm sure everybody on your show knows that the best investment you can ever make is in yourself. And I would just encourage everybody to go do that. So constantly look at your peak and figure out, am I at my peak now, or how can I adjust my peak over the course of the next short, medium, long term?
Love it. For being on the show. I hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mark. This was awesome.
Awesome.